I was stacking firewood on the back porch when I heard the car door. Not the familiar sound of a neighbor or a delivery truck. This was different, slow, deliberate, the kind of sound that makes the hairs on your arm stand up before your brain even knows why. I set down the log I was holding and looked around the corner of the house. A silver sedan, out of state plates, and my son stepping out of the passenger side. My son, who I hadn't seen in 4 years. My son, who had left his 8-year-old boy on my doorstep on a Tuesday morning in October and driven away without looking back. I stood very still, the way you stand when you're not sure yet whether something is a threat or just a memory wearing a familiar face. He saw me, raised one hand in a small wave like we'd parted on good terms, like no time had passed at all. I didn't wave back. Let me tell you about the Tuesday morning he left. It was 2017. I'd just retired from 31 years teaching middle school mathematics in Knoxville, Tennessee. My wife, Dorothea, had passed the spring before pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The house felt like a museum. Every room held something that used to be ours and now was only mine. My son, Crane. He'd always gone by that, his mother's maiden name as a middle name, which stuck, had called me the week before. He said he and his wife Petra needed to figure some things out. That was how he talked about hard things. He wrapped them in soft language until they almost disappeared. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Just things, Dad. We'll talk when we get there." They pulled up on a Tuesday. Crane was 34 then. Petra sat in the passenger seat and never got out of the car. I noticed that right away. She sat with her arms crossed and her eyes on the dashboard. My grandson, Eli, climbed out of the back seat. He was 8 years old and carrying a backpack that looked too heavy for his small frame. He had his mother's dark eyes and his grandmother's stubborn chin, and he walked to me like he already understood more than anyone had told him. Crane popped the trunk. There were 2 suitcases inside. "Just until we get settled," he said. "It won't be long." I looked at him. I looked at those suitcases. I looked at Eli, who had taken my hand without a word and was standing beside me like I was the only solid thing in his world. "Settled where?" I asked. Crane talked for a while without saying anything. Phoenix, a business opportunity. Petra's family was out there. Fresh start. He used the phrase temporary situation 3 times. He kept looking past my shoulder at the house instead of at me. I said, "What about Eli's school?" He said, "You taught kids his whole life, Dad. You'll figure it out." He hugged Eli once. Quick, the kind of hug that's really a goodbye pretending not to be. He got back in the car. Petra never turned around. I stood in my driveway holding my grandson's hand and watched him back out. Eli said nothing. He just gripped my hand a little tighter. I said, "You hungry, buddy?" He nodded. We went inside. I want to be honest about the early days because it wasn't easy, and I think people need to hear that. I was 62 years old, newly widowed. I had been a teacher, not a parent in the active daily sense, for decades. Crane had grown up and left, and Dorothea and I had settled into the quiet rhythms of people whose work is mostly done. And here was this boy with a too heavy backpack and a 1,000-yard stare, and I had no idea at first what was actually going on with him. The school records Crane had left with me were sparse. Eli had been enrolled in 3 different schools in 4 years. There were notes from teachers, words like difficulty with transitions, sensory sensitivities, does not respond well to group instruction. One note, handwritten, said simply, has trouble making friends, very literal, smart, but not in the way we measure. There was a referral for evaluation that had never been followed through on. I called the number at the top of the referral form. The specialist said there was a 6-month waiting list. I put Eli on the list. In the meantime, I did what I'd spent 31 years learning to do. I watched him, Not the way you watch a problem, but the way you watch a person, looking for what they respond to, what they respond to, what they restrained from, what lights something up behind their eyes. Ellie did not like loud rooms. He did not like open-ended instructions. He did not like when plans changed without warning. These weren't complaints or behaviors. They were just how he was wired, and once I understood that, I could work with it. What he loved was patterns, numbers, sequences, the way things fit together with internal logic. He could spend 2 hours arranging objects on a surface according to rules only he understood, and his face during those 2 hours was the most peaceful thing I had ever seen. He loved maps. He had memorized the road atlas I kept in the kitchen junk drawer within a week of arriving. He would quiz me. "What's the county seat of Meigs County, Tennessee?" I'd have to look it up. He already knew. He loved being read to at night, but only certain books, and always the same ones in the same order. He did not love school. The elementary school 2 miles from my house was loud and large and structured in a way that worked against how Eli processed things. His 2nd grade teacher was a kind woman, but overwhelmed. She called me in November to tell me Eli was isolating himself and had difficulty completing timed tests. I sat with her after school and explained what I'd learned about Eli in 8 weeks. I watched her take notes. I brought printed materials about twice exceptional learners, kids who are both gifted and have processing differences. "Has he been formally diagnosed?" she asked. "We're waiting on that," I said, "but we don't need a label to make reasonable accommodations." By the end of the school year, Eli had a 504 plan and a student support team, and his teacher had become something of an advocate for him. It took time. It took showing up. It took showing up. It took me learning when to push and when to let the institution move at its own pace. The formal evaluation came in the spring of his 2nd year with me. Autism spectrum disorder, level 1. High functioning, exceptional pattern recognition, above average mathematical reasoning, significantly above average working memory. The evaluator used the phrase I wrote down in the margin of her report. "This child's mind works like precision engineering. It just needs the right environment to perform." I take that sentence to the inside of my kitchen cabinet where I would see it every morning. I should tell you what happened with Crane during those years, because it matters. The first 6 months he called semi-regularly. "How's Eli?" "Fine." "How's school?" "Fine." "You need money for anything?" "We're okay." The calls got shorter and further apart. By the 2nd year, they were monthly. By the 3rd year, occasional. I never told Eli his father had abandoned him. I don't know if that was right or wrong. I've turned it over many times since. What I said, when Eli asked, was that his dad was going through some hard things and that it wasn't about Eli, and that some people needed a long time to figure out how to show up. Eli accepted this, the way he accepted most things, quietly and with more understanding than any child should have to have. I consulted a family attorney in year 2. I asked about my legal standing, about what options I had to formalize things. The attorney told me I could petition for guardianship, but doing so would require formally notifying Crane and Petra, and could create legal conflict if they chose to contest. I thought about it a long time. Eli was stable. He was in a good school situation. Disrupting that with a legal battle felt like the wrong move. I filed what paperwork I could. A notarized parental authorization letter from Crane that allowed me to make medical and educational decisions. It wasn't perfect, but it kept us moving. What I want you to understand is that every decision I made during those years, I made around one question: what is best for Eli? Not what was best for me. Not what would satisfy my anger at my son. Not what would satisfy my anger of my son. Not what would feel like justice. What was best for Eli? Ellie started coding when he was 11. I don't take credit for this. I didn't push him toward it. He found a free tutorial platform online one afternoon when I was grading some papers for a former colleague at the community college who'd asked me to help evaluate a batch of student assessments. She was swamped, and I had the time. I was sitting at the kitchen table, and Eli was on the old laptop across from me. And at some point, I looked up, and he was not watching videos. He was writing something. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Following instructions," he said. "It's like math, but for making things." That was how Eli described coding. I got him a better laptop for his birthday. He worked through every free course he could find. Then I paid for some structured curriculum. He had a gift for it that went beyond what the courses could measure. He didn't just learn the syntax, he thought in it. He could see the architecture of a problem from multiple angles simultaneously and find solutions that more conventionally minded thinkers wouldn't reach. By 13, he was building simple apps. By 14, he had a small portfolio. By 15, he was corresponding with developers twice his age who found him online and assumed, for months in some cases, that they were talking to an adult. There was one project that started in his sophomore year of high school. He'd spent a long time frustrated by the fact that so many of his classmates with learning differences, kids with dyslexia, processing disorders, attention difficulties, were constantly lost inside the school's own software systems. The interfaces were not designed for the way their brains worked. Information was buried. Notifications were confusing. Schedules were presented in formats that made executive function problems worse, not better. Illy spent 14 months building something different. He called it Waymark. It was a learning management interface, essentially a layer that sat on top of existing school software and reorganized information according to how neurodivergent learners actually processed it. Clean, modular, highly customizable. Users could set their own visual preferences, their own alert patterns, their own organizational logic. He beta tested it with 23 students at his school, got written feedback, refined it for 6 months, and quietly released it. I remember the morning he showed me the download numbers. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd first typed following instructions 5 years earlier, and turned the laptop screen toward me. I looked at the numbers. "Ellie," I said, "how long has this been live?" 8 weeks, he said. 31,000 downloads in 8 weeks. Zero marketing. Just word of mouth through communities of parents, teachers, and neurodivergent learners who had found something that actually worked for them. He was 16 years old. I won't walk through all the steps of what came next because some of it is still in process and some of it is Eli's story to tell, not mine. What I will say is this. A licensing partnership with an education technology company was finalized before Eli's 17th birthday. The terms of that agreement, including the valuation of Waymark, became a matter of public record in Tennessee business filings. $3.8 million. Eli set aside a portion for college. The rest went into a trust I helped him establish with an attorney and a financial advisor. We did it carefully and quietly. Eli was not interested in attention. He was interested in the next project. What I did not anticipate, what I should have anticipated maybe, but wanted not to, was that the news would reach Crane. I don't know exactly how. The business filing was public. There were some local news mentions. The education technology press covered it. However it happened, it happened. My son called me on a Thursday in March. It was the first time he'd called in 11 months. "Dad," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about Eli." I sat down. I held the phone very still. "I hear things are going well for him," he said. "Eli is doing very well," I said. "He works hard." "I want to come see him," Crane said. I think it's time we reconnected. Petra and I both feel that way. Family is important. He should know his parents." I asked him where he'd been for 9 years. He said things had been complicated. I asked him if he understood what Eli had been through, what it had taken to get him to where he was. He said he was sure it had been hard on everyone. There it was, that soft language again, wrapping real things until they almost disappeared. I said I would tell Eli, he called. I said the decision of whether to see him would be Eli's alone. Crane said that was fair. He said there might be some other things to discuss, financial things, things related to parental rights and the management of Eli's assets. I hung up. I told Eli that evening. We were eating dinner. He still liked his food the same way, nothing touching, fork on the right, specific placement, and I waited until he was finished before I said his father had called. Eli set down his fork. He looked at the table for a long moment. "What does he want?" he asked. I told him the truth. All of it. The call, the mention of family reconnection, the mention of parental rights and finances. I did not soften it. Eli had always handled truth better than uncertainty. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Does he know there's nothing to claim?" I looked at him. "The trust is structured so that neither parent can access or direct the assets," Eli said. "I had the attorney write it that way. I looked up what would happen if they came back. I did it when we set it up." I stared at my grandson across the kitchen table. "You planned for this?" I asked. He shrugged, the way he did when something seemed obvious to him. "You taught me to think ahead," he said. "I just applied it." Crane arrived the following Saturday with Petra and, I learned when the car door opened, an attorney, a man in a gray suit who stepped out and introduced himself with a card before he'd even shaken anyone's hand. I stood on the porch. My jaw was tight. My hands, I will admit, were not entirely steady. The attorney began talking about parental rights, about the fact that neither parent had legally relinquished custody, about the valuation of Eli's business assets, and the possibility that, as minors' earnings in Tennessee, they fell under certain parental considerations. I was terrified, in that specific way you feel when you've done everything right and yet the machinery of the law seems like it might not care. And then the front door opened behind me. Ellie came out. He was 17, already as tall as I was, wearing the same kind of plain t-shirt and dark jeans he wore every day. He had a folder under his arm. He looked at his father. His father looked at him. Something passed between them that I could not fully read. 9 years of absence in 2 seconds. He looked at the attorney. "I have copies of the trust documentation," Eli said. His voice was calm, clear, the voice of someone who had rehearsed nothing because he didn't need to. "The assets are structured in an irrevocable trust administered by an independent trustee. Neither parent is a named beneficiary or managing party. If you'd like to challenge that, you're welcome to try, but you'll need to demonstrate harm or improper establishment, and I don't believe that claim will hold." The attorney started to say something. Ellie held up one hand, gently. "I'm not finished," he said. He opened the folder. He had printed documents. He walked the attorney through each one, the trust establishment date, the trustee appointment, the legal language he had specifically requested to address third-party claims on the basis of parental relationship. He had done this with more precision than most adults I had ever watched navigate a legal situation. Crane hadn't said a word. Ellie looked at his father then, not with anger. That surprised me the most. There was no anger in it. "I know you had a hard time," Eli said. "I've had a hard time too, but Grandpa was here every day. He was at every school meeting. He was in the kitchen every morning. He drove me to every appointment. He stayed up reading about how my brain worked because he wanted to understand me." His voice didn't waver. "Whatever you came here for, I can't give you. But I want you to know that I'm okay. I turned out okay, and that has nothing to do with either of you." He turned and walked back into the house. The door didn't slam. He closed it quietly. The attorney and Crane spoke in low voices for a few minutes. Then the attorney got in his car. Crane stood in my driveway for a while. Petra had not gotten out of the car. Some things don't change. He looked at me. "He's remarkable," Crane said. "Yes," I said, "he is." Crane looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe an apology was in there somewhere, behind the soft language, behind all the years of convenient distance. Maybe it wasn't. I didn't have room in me at that moment to sort it out. "He's remarkable," Crane said again, and then he got in the car. I stood on the porch and watched them back out of the driveway. Same driveway, 9 years later. I thought about Dorothea, how she would have handled this, what she would have said. I thought she would have been proud of Eli in a way that would have moved her to tears. I thought she probably would have been more generous toward Crane than I felt capable of being, because she was built that way. I thought about the day he'd arrived with that backpack, the way his small hand found mine. Illy started at Georgia Tech in the fall, computer science. He has a single dorm room because his accommodation plan accounts for his sensory preferences, and the university has been remarkably good about it. He calls me most Sundays. We talk about whatever he's working on, which I usually only half understand, and about the road atlas, facts he still collects the way other people collect stamps, and about what to watch next time I come visit. He called me in October, a few weeks into his first semester. "How's it going?" I asked. "It's a good environment," he said. "It was designed well. I think someone thought carefully about how people learn here." "That makes a difference," I said. "Yeah," he said. "I know." A pause. "Grandpa." "Yeah, buddy." "I've been thinking about what I want to do with the next project. The one after Waymark." "Tell me." He told me. It was something to do with transition support for young adults with developmental differences entering post-secondary education, the exact gap he'd just navigated himself. He'd already been speaking with a researcher at Vanderbilt who was interested in collaborating. I sat in my kitchen, in the chair I'd sat in for 30 years, at the table where he'd first typed following instructions, where we'd eaten 10,000 meals, where he'd shown me a number that changed his life and hadn't changed him at all. "That sounds like exactly the right problem to work on," I said. He said, "I thought so too." I didn't thank him for calling. I didn't tell him how much I loved him, not right then, because with Eli some things are better shown over time than said in a single sentence. But I sat with the phone after we hung up, and I let the quiet of the house settle around me, and it didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like the place where something good had been built, and I had gotten to watch it happen every day from the very beginning. I keep coming back to that Tuesday morning in 2017, the backpack that was too heavy for a small frame, the way Eli's hand found mine without being asked. He didn't know me well enough yet to trust me. He just had no one else, and neither, in a way, did I. People sometimes ask me what I did right. I never know how to answer that because most of what I did was just show up every morning, every school meeting, every appointment that required someone to sit in a chair and advocate for a child who processed the world differently than the room expected. Showing up is not a strategy. It's just a choice you make again and again until it becomes who you are. But I think what I've learned, what this whole thing with Eli taught me, is that character is not one thing. It's 3 things working together, and when any one of them is missing, the whole structure wobbles. The first is doing right by people even when there's no audience. Crane left because it was hard. He came back because it was profitable. That gap between leaving and returning is where a person's true character lives. I'm not saying I'd been perfect. I'd been impatient. I make calls I'm not proud of, but I stayed. And staying when no one is watching and no one is keeping score is the clearest measure of whether your values are real or just decorative. The second is using your mind honestly. Eli did not build Waymark because he wanted to be rich. He built it because he saw a real problem. Kids like him lost inside systems that weren't designed for them, and he figured out how to solve it. That's intelligence in its truest form. Not test scores or credentials, but the capacity to look at something broken and ask, seriously and carefully, how it could work better. I spent 31 years teaching mathematics, and the students who moved me most were never the ones who could recite the formula. They were the ones who wanted to understand why the formula was true. The third is the one that doesn't get enough credit. It's the ability to keep going through the long, unremarkable middle, the months and years when nothing feels like progress, when the work is invisible and the results are distant and the world isn't paying attention. Eli spent 14 months on Waymark before anyone outside our house had heard of it. 14 months of evenings at the kitchen table, refining and testing and starting over. That kind of persistence isn't glamorous, it's just necessary. When Crane stood in my driveway with that attorney and Eli walked out with his folder, calm, prepared, unhurried, I understood something I hadn't fully put into words before. The qualities that protected Eli that day, that made him untouchable in the best possible sense, were not things that had happened to him. They were things he had built. One ordinary day at a time, at the same kitchen table, in the same house, with the same quiet routine that I had been so afraid, was not enough. It was enough. It was more than enough. I think about Dorothea sometimes and what she would have made of all of it. I think she would have looked at Eli and seen exactly what I see. Not a success story, not a headline, just a person who turned out to be exactly who he was always capable of being, once somebody decided to pay attention. That part, the deciding to pay attention, that was mine to do, and I'm glad I did it.